Just to close off with, from a global perspective, the South African Rand has done incredibly well, relatively speaking, since the election. When you listen for the messages on the breeze, there's a lot of positive things coming through. This conversation that we've had today would never have happened pre 2021, for instance. It was inconceivable. So, how do you look back at the progress of the country over the last 3 years that you've been so intimately involved with the democratic process?
So I think what people want, what business wants, is confidence and certainty. And I think for the first time in a long time, regardless of the bumps and bruises that we'll have along the way in figuring out what this new government looks like and sounds like, and how all the children play together, but I think people are happy that for once there's some sort of stability. There's not people bickering and fighting, but there seems to be a concerted effort, or more movement forward than backwards, or at least it sounds like that for the time being. We got stuck in this notion that South Africa continuously has to move backwards, and I think people are feeling that South Africa can actually move forwards. Not everything will be perfect and not everything will be right all the time, and a lot of things are going to take time to fix. But I think there's that sentiment that, wow, okay, South Africa can move forward and people can work together. It doesn't just have to be endless shouting at each other and this constant conflict. I also think that there's a new enemy, if you want to use that, and that is you have some really regressive forces at work in South Africa, and people know that. When I say people, the political establishment knows that, and it's dangerous. And the results of the election prove that that you can't necessarily speak rational economics, statescraft with the average citizen in South Africa. The average voter, the average citizen in South Africa is hungry, or has been fed lies, or is jobless, or is disillusioned. And it's easy to take advantage of people who are in that state. So the high-level talks and speeches and bickering and fighting that was taking place, I think people realized that the average voter on the ground is not actually interested, and it doesn't resonate with it. And that there's a group of people out there, and it's not just the Mkhonto weSizwe party, but there's a real establishment against stability in South Africa for their own benefit. And the people on the other side, people in my political party, and the ANC and others, have realized that there's more to lose by not working together than there is to gain.
Yeah, really interesting thoughts from Chris Pappas. I know many of you missed him. It's been a long time he featured on this channel. It was a really busy electioneering period for him, especially when he was trying to fight for the position of Premier of KZN. But somehow he wasn't successful with that. Although in this video you could hear that he claimed that the DA in KZN got more votes, I think up to 2,000 extra votes as compared to the last elections. And he spoke about the fact of how, they saw his leadership as, I think it's Premier of Umgani or of the municipality, and Umgeni municipality. And so the notion of why the Rand, for example, now becomes an interesting case study for me is the fact that, the market itself, it's another agency that many political analysts, do not talk about much. But it's really interesting how the market, if you study the market and the history, those charts, those of you who are stock traders or, understand the stock markets, as a historian, for example, I'm able to interpret history from the variations of the trades of the stock charts. Okay. And so when the market gives a kind of like reasoning, or kind of like shift in its interpretation of politics, it's really important to really understand. And so the fact that the Rand seems to be smashing records, the Rand seems to be making waves, it's kind of like from a negative movement to a positive one, speaks to investors' interpretation and the market's interpretation of what the GNU represents for South Africa, in these times, because it speaks to the fact that it speaks of this capital attraction, where the rand seems to have been gaining more strength because of the investor confidence that is slowly emerging as a result of the new leadership in the government of national unity held by the majority ANC and the DA, with the other smaller parties, the PAIFP, UDM, and the likes. And then also the fact that, it then speaks about, a positivity, so to speak, at least for the next 5 years. I suspect that anyway, this investor confidence would still remain constant, because there was a lot of fear prior to the election, that prior to the elections, and now prior to the GNU, that South Africa would be shifted towards a left-wing, leftist political landscape if the likes of what is now the Progressive Caucus would assume power. And a lot of investors were already ready to take they were ready to fly out with their investments out of South Africa. I featured videos here with Rob Hersov actually speaking about how he's that he wouldn't be leaving South Africa, but the fact that most of his investments aren't in South Africa anymore because of the performance of the ANC, which he called what was the word he used? I think he called it a sort of like a feudalist organization, okay, and that he wasn't managing South Africa right. You see, so that's that was pre-election, but now that the GNU has actually set up, take its place in South Africa's political space, and the performance of many of its ministers. I see most of your comments are really positive. Most of you comments really have these positive comments about the different ministries and the ministers going on in the ministries. Peter Kronwald of Correctional Services, Gaten McKenzie of Sports, and the likes of Leon Scriber in Home Affairs, and John Steinhuis in Agriculture. I see a lot of your comments in that regard, although there are also the comments as well that actually say that most of the comments on this channel are positive, because they kind of like speak because of the fact that there's the white minority, or the white minority, the minoritarian mindset seems to be now in charge of these ministries in that regard. And so these are the very comments I try to really interpret as you guys comment on this channel, and I really appreciate your comments. But Chris Pappas' understanding and his interpretation of why the rand seems to be kicking off in this regard, I believe stems from the investor confidence in the government of national unity, investor confidence in the rhetoric of the government of national unity, investor confidence probably in President Cyril Ramaphosa, but also his ability and his willingness to actually let the voice of the people guide the movement of the government, you see, and that the ANC wasn't really stubborn in adhering to the voice of the people, of the electorates, of the results of the elections, who actually demanded that they didn't want the ANC to govern South Africa anymore alone, but they wanted some form of partnership with other parties to form what President Ramaphosa now captured and condensed in the term a government of national unity. And so this is the reason why this investor confidence seems to be rising. A lot of people are positive about the country, the nation state of South Africa. I even many of your comments here, when many diasporan South Africans arguing that they are slowly getting ready to return home because they can see positivity, they can see light, in what's been really emerging, out of the political landscape in South Africa. So it's a really positive thing anyway that the rand is actually picking up. It speaks to the fact that the really negative statistics that actually herald South Africa's development, with a 33% unemployment rate. I think I read a report yesterday that even the 33% unemployment rate has had a dip to now 35%. So the unemployment problem is even getting worse, and so with all of that problem, and the violence problem, the safety problem, and all that, the policing issues that actually herald South Africa, it would have been a disaster if it would have been heard that the rand itself now contributes, the fall of the rand contributing to that disaster. We might have been seeing a massive inflation massive inflation threat, a massive inflation problem, which would worsen the whole condition of South Africa. Would have seen more South Africans leaving the country. So the fact that the rand's appreciation actually is something that actually still remains positive is actually one thing that could actually give South Africans hope that in in this pursuit of unity, in this pursuit of the national question, in this pursuit of trying to find its feet and its future and where it wants to be as a nation of diversity. At least there's one wing, one element that the nation could hold on to and say, yes, at least with this, we seem to be winning, and probably we can build on this as we walk towards the light of excellence and growth as a nation. But anyway, I don't know, what do you guys think about Chris Pappas' speech here? I think it was a really interesting one for me. But share your thoughts. Share your thoughts in the comments.